The Watts are not allowed to visit Bella and Cece's graves and Shanann's grave? Question mark. Let's talk about it. So the algorithm on YouTube has changed. And so whenever I put something in search, a lot of things come up that I'm not necessarily looking for, but that I get, and I get to find out information by proxy. And one of the things that I heard by proxy is that Cindy and Ronnie Watts are not allowed to visit Bella and Cece's graves, or if they do, they get things thrown at them, they get insults yelled at them. And somebody, a YouTube creator, was saying just how terrible that is. It's just so awful that Cindy and Ronnie can't visit their granddaughter's graves. Now, everything else aside, all my bias, all my prejudices, all my dislike alike of their behavior, of the Watts behavior, they do, in theory, Cindy and Ronnie Watts do, in theory, have the right to visit their grandchildren's graves. They are just as much related to Bella and Cece as the other family are. So yes, I do think, in theory and in principle, that Cindy and Ronnie Watts, regardless of my negative feelings about them, and I have a lot of negative feelings about them because of their lack of regard for Shanann and how disrespectful they have been to Shanann since their son murdered her. But yes, in theory, I do believe that they should be allowed to visit their grandchildren's graves because that's their grandchildren. And that's putting all my dislike of their behavior, my biases, my prejudices, I'm not a fan of the Watts family because of how disrespectful they've treated Shanann in her death. I don't have the compassion for them because they haven't shown any compassion for Shanann since her death whatsoever. It's all Shanann's fault. Their son is always innocent. They always portray their son and themselves as victims, and they're no victims. So I understand people taking issue with them visiting their grandchildren's graves, particularly because of how they've spoken about Shanann and what they've done, using channels to degrade, bash, spread lies, and just, continue the campaign to just degrade Shanann, drag her name through the mud. Everything is Shanann's fault. Their son is innocent. The good thing is that regardless of their campaign to make Shanann look like the bad person in the marriage and in the situation and even in the crime itself, nothing that they say or do is going to change the fate of their son, Chris Watts. He's never going to be released. He could try to escape and he could die. A helicopter's blowing over me. For goodness sakes, go away, helicopter. But they could, he's never going to be released. No appeal is going to work. No 35C is going to work. And, AD in the past has dangled this carrot that he's somehow helping Chris Watts with a 35C or an appeal, which is never going to happen because he's never going to be released. Not to mention the fact that Scott Reich is right. And I have issues with Scott Reich, but I'm going to talk about him in another episode. Scott Reich is right, however, when he says that there is absolutely no chance that Chris Watts is going to get released. And because he's confessed so many times to actually committing the crime, that actually even more weakens his case. I mean, he never had a chance to begin with, but because he's told so many different versions of him being the responsible criminal, that he has no chance, because those words, the things that he said to Sharon and Cadle, the things that he said to, in the prison confession, all of these things will be used against him, would theoretically be used against him in a court of law. So, I mean, he has no chance of ever being released, but the Watts, because they're in denial and because they're image conscious and because they put their son on a pedestal, Cindy and Ronnie Watts put their son on a pedestal, they will keep trying to figure out ways to get him out, because they will forever be in denial. And the truth of the matter is, either they will die, or he will die, or Chris will die in prison, or they will die. And, he's never going to actually be legally released. He could try to escape. Who knows if he would ever try to escape? That's always a possibility. People escape from prison. It happens all the time. But he's never going to be released or granted an appeal or a 35C in the legal sense. But I understand why people would be opposed to Cindy and Ronnie Watts visiting their grandchildren's grave, because they're buried, their grandchildren are buried with Shanann. And for the past 3 years, coming up to the 3 years anniversary, I hate to say that word, but can't think of a better word. For lack of a better term, we're coming up to the 3-year anniversary, or is it 4 years? Kind of losing time here. We're coming up to, another anniversary of these precious human beings who had every right to live. We're coming up to another anniversary of them being gone. And it's all because of Chris Watts and his selfishness and his entitlement and his narcissism. And we see why, a logical person can see why he turned out the way he did, because he comes from a very narcissistic family who believe that he has done no wrong, despite all the evidence that we have, despite the fact that he's confessed many times. I don't think we've ever gotten a completely true confession, because I don't think he's capable of telling the truth. I don't think he has the morals, the morals to tell the truth. I don't think he's a good person. I don't think he has a single good bone in his body. I think he was mimicking and acting the entire time. I don't think he's ever truly been himself. So, I can see why he turned out the way he did, because he was put on a pedestal, told what a wonderful, great guy he was, and he hid behind that nice guy mask. I mean, there's people in my family who are like Chris Watts or who are like Bill Cosby. They represent themselves as nice people. They represent themselves as good people. But really, when you actually spend time with them, or you live with them, or you get to know the real them, you realize who they represent themselves to be is not who they really are. And then there are many in my family like that, who pretend that they're nice people and they seem nice on the surface. And then when you actually get to know them, you realize that they're narcissistic, egotistical, abusive. So I know people like Chris Watts and Bill Cosby and all the guys that pretend to be nice, that are really just nasty pieces of work underneath. That's Chris Watts. He's a nasty piece of work who played nice guy for a very long time. But like I said, I do understand why people would be offended and opposed to Cindy and Ronnie Watts visiting their grandchildren's grave, because for the past 3 years, they haven't held their son accountable for anything. And all they've done is disrespected Shanann. And I totally understand why people would be opposed to them visiting the grave of Bella and Cece, because they're buried with Shanann. They're all buried together. And they've done nothing but try to bring her name down. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked out in that sense. It hasn't worked out because he's still in prison. 35C flopped. Any appeal of 35C is going to flop. And now you just have all these people who are hangers-on, who are either Team Watts or Team Ruchek. I'm terrible at saying Shanann's family's name, so I'm going to say Team R or Team Watts. And I'm not on any team. I see myself as an independent thinker, just like I'm neither fully Democrat and I'm neither fully Republican. I think independently of either Watts or Ruchek or Democrat or Republican. I have my own mind, and I don't want to be limited or constrained into thinking in a certain way just because I belong to a particular team, or I have more compassion for Shanann's family, there's no question, but I don't go around taking sides. I do acknowledge that the Watts have lost. I mean, can you imagine what it would have been like for them to hear these horrible details of what their son has done, and to then find out that their grandchildren have been murdered, and to get all these lies from their son, all these conflicting stories, and then to have to, walk into court and, be in the spotlight and be in the limelight, something that they weren't expecting. I mean, I don't feel sorry for them because of the disgraceful way they've behaved towards Shanann and her memory. But I do understand that they have also lost. So in theory, they do have the right to visit Bella and Cece's grave, but I can understand why people are completely opposed to them visiting their grandchildren's grave because of how disrespectful, nasty, and vindictive they've been towards Shanann since she died. And that's all I have to say on that matter.